My name is Emily Parker, and I'm 30 years old. Most people who know me now think my life is simple. I make coffee at a cafe called the Daily Brew downtown, and I teach music theory to teenagers who'd rather be anywhere else. But there's a version of me that existed before all of this, a version that everyone in my small town remembers far better than I wish they would. When I was 7, my mother Karen took me to a piano competition. I wasn't competing. I was too young. But I remember standing in the auditorium, watching a girl about 16 years old perform a Chopin nocturne, and something in my chest broke open. I told my mother that night that I wanted to play like that. I wanted to feel like that. I wanted to be someone who created beauty instead of just consuming it. Karen heard this as a promise. By the time I was 12, I had already won 3 provincial competitions. By 15, I was being scouted by conservatories across the state. Teachers would call our house asking if I might consider taking full scholarships. My mother framed every newspaper clipping, every certificate, every program with my name highlighted in gold marker. She rearranged the living room furniture so that the piano was the first thing visitors would see when they walked through the front door. She told people I was her redemption, though I didn't understand then what she meant by that word. I learned it later when she finally told me the story. Karen had been a pianist, too. Her mother, my grandmother, whom I never knew well, had forced her into competition after competition throughout her childhood. Karen said her mother believed that women who pursued music professionally were making themselves available to unsuitable attention. That was her exact phrase, unsuitable attention. As if playing an instrument beautifully was somehow an invitation to impropriety. Karen's mother pulled her out of Juilliard at 19 and married her off to my father instead. She told Karen that a woman's real talent was knowing how to be a good wife, so Karen channeled all of her unfulfilled ambition into me, except she didn't frame it that way. She framed it as love. She framed it as belief in my potential. And I, being a child who simply wanted her approval, internalized every message, that my worth was measured in gold medals, that my body existed primarily to produce sound, that the opinions of strangers in auditorium seats mattered more than my own emotional well-being. I was 17 when everything fell apart. The scholarship audition for the State Academy was scheduled for a Saturday in March. It was the kind of opportunity that doesn't come around twice. This was the audition that would have determined my entire life's trajectory. This was the moment I had been groomed for since I was a child. Karen had spent months preparing me, not just musically, but emotionally. She had drilled into me the importance of appearing composed, feminine, non-threatening. She didn't use those exact words, of course. Instead, she said things like, "Play softer during the opening phrase. Let them come to you rather than demanding attention." And, "Your vibrato is too aggressive for a young woman. Men find that off-putting." And my personal favorite, which I've never forgotten, "Remember that you're performing for people who have never heard someone like you before. Don't frighten them with your competence." I spent weeks trying to make myself smaller. I practiced playing with restraint, with delicacy, with what my mother called appropriate femininity. I was trying to compress myself into a shape that would be palatable to the judges. I was trying to become background music in my own life story. The night before the audition, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed thinking about all the hours I had invested, the thousands of hours, the blistered fingers, the competitions where I played while sick, while exhausted, while emotionally devastated about something I was supposed to perform through. I thought about the birthday parties I had missed because of rehearsals. I thought about the friends I didn't have because I had no time for friendship. I thought about the boyfriend who had broken up with me because he said I seemed like I didn't really want to be in a relationship with him. I was too focused on other things. And then, in the morning, my hands began to shake. It wasn't nervousness, it was something deeper. Something like my body's way of saying, "This is not sustainable. This is not who you actually are." I tried to hide it from my mother. I wore long sleeves. I kept my hands in my lap when we drove to the academy. But when I sat down at that piano in front of the 5 judges, my trembling was so severe that I could barely press the keys accurately. I played the first piece, Liszt's La Campanella, with my hands shaking so badly that it sounded like I had never learned to play the piano at all. The judges exchanged uncomfortable glances. By the middle of the second piece, I realized that I was not going to be offered a scholarship. By the time I finished, I already knew I had destroyed the one opportunity I had been told my entire life would define me. When we got home, my mother was silent for exactly 47 minutes. I counted. Then she said, "Well, I suppose some people simply don't have the temperament for this kind of pressure. Some people are meant to be background, not featured." She left the room. I went to my bedroom. I took my hand-knitted shawl, the one my grandmother had made before she died, and I wrapped it around the piano. I never played again. Years passed. Years of people asking what happened to the prodigy. Years of my mother deflecting those questions with increasingly elaborate stories. I had injured my hand and could no longer play at a professional level. I had decided to pursue other interests. I had fallen ill and hadn't fully recovered. The stories changed depending on who was asking, but the underlying message was always the same. Emily Parker was no longer worth talking about. When I was 28, my older sister Olivia got engaged. Olivia had always existed in my shadow, or so everyone thought. In reality, Olivia was terrified of that shadow. She had spent her entire life trying to be small enough not to disturb the mythology that had been constructed around my talent, but she had also been building her own mythology in secret. She had become a lawyer. She had become successful. She had become everything my mother wanted me to be, except my mother didn't know it yet, because Olivia had never performed it publicly. The wedding was planned for the following spring, a grand affair with 200 guests, a reception at the Riverside Hotel, and a playlist that my mother had apparently spent weeks curating. My mother called me exactly 1 week before the ceremony and asked if I would be willing to contribute something musical to the reception. She made it sound like a casual request, like she wasn't asking me to resurrect my entire identity. I said no. She asked again, and again, and again. She enlisted my father, Robert, who everyone calls Bob, to call me. She created an email chain with my sister, asking Olivia to encourage me. She even reached out to my old piano teacher, Jenna Collins, who somehow still had my phone number, and who called me on a Tuesday evening to tell me that she thought I was making a mistake. "You have a gift," Jenna said, "and you're letting fear steal it from you." Again. That word, again, landed something in me, because she was right. I was letting fear do the stealing. I was letting my mother's fear, my own fear, the fear embedded in my family's entire structure, prevent me from reclaiming something that had been mine to begin with. So I told my mother that I would play at the wedding. But I would play what I wanted to play, not what she had selected for the background. I would play a piece that I had been thinking about for weeks, a piece that I had started to compose during late nights at my apartment when I couldn't sleep. I had written it out on staff paper by hand, in pencil, the notes filling pages and pages with my own handwriting. I had named it Return. The piece was not soft. It was not delicate. It was not designed to be palatable or non-threatening. It was designed to be honest. My mother's response came in an email marked high priority. She wrote, "Emily, we are thrilled that you will be contributing to the musical atmosphere of Olivia's big day. However, given the formal nature of this event and the distinguished guest list, we would prefer that you stick to something more classical, more elegant, more appropriate. Perhaps a simple rendition of Clair de Lune? Something that won't overwhelm the space?" "We need your support, not your spotlight." The phrase, "We need your support, not your spotlight," is what I kept coming back to. Because that sentence contained the entire architecture of my childhood. That sentence said, "Your job is to exist in the margins. Your job is to make other people comfortable with their own success. Your job is to be background." I decided in that moment that I was going to change the story. The week before the wedding, I took out my hand-knitted shawl, the one from my piano. I unwrapped it, and I sat down at the keyboard for the first time in 13 years. My hands were not the hands of a prodigy anymore. They were the hands of someone who had spent years making coffee, writing grant proposals for nonprofits, struggling with whether to stay in my hometown or try to build a different kind of life elsewhere. My hands were trembling. I began to play, and the trembling continued. My fingers found the keys, but they were hesitant, uncertain, searching for muscle memory that had been dormant for over a decade. I played through the shaking. I played the opening phrases of my composition, and halfway through, something shifted. The trembling didn't stop, but I stopped noticing it. I stopped fighting it. I let it become part of the music. I called Jenna Collins after that first practice session. I asked if I could see her. She invited me to her home, a small bungalow near the high school where she still teaches. When I arrived, she made tea, and we sat in her music room surrounded by scores and metronomes and student compositions tacked to the walls. "Tell me what's happening," Jenna said. "I'm terrified," I told her. "I'm terrified that I'm going to fail again. I'm terrified that I'm going to get on that stage and my hands are going to betray me the way they did at the Academy audition. I'm terrified that I'm playing this piece not because I want to, but because I'm trying to prove something to my mother. And if I'm doing it to prove something to her, then I'm back where I started, aren't I? I'm still a puppet." Jenna leaned back in her chair. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said something I have never forgotten. "The truth can hurt people, Emily. Playing honestly, playing genuinely, playing in a way that serves the music instead of serving other people's comfort, that can hurt them. Your mother will be hurt by what you're about to do. Your father might be hurt. Some of the guests might feel uncomfortable. But here's what I want you to understand. Your pain is not responsible for anyone else's growth. Your silence is not responsible for anyone else's comfort. And playing small will not keep anyone you love from being angry at you anyway. It will just make sure that you're also angry at yourself." I practiced that piece every single day for the next week. I practiced in my apartment, standing in front of my piano in the early mornings before work. I practiced the breathing techniques that my mother had taught me years ago, but I changed them. Instead of breathing to calm my nervous system into submission, I breathed to anchor myself to my own experience. I breathed to create a container for my emotion rather than to eliminate it. By the day before the wedding, I could play "Return" without looking at the sheet music. The piece was approximately 8 minutes long, structured in 3 movements, beginning with a motif that was almost nursery-like in its simplicity, but grew increasingly complex as the piece progressed. The second movement was a section where the melody line disintegrated, where the notes became fragmented and asymmetrical, mirroring the fracturing that happens when pressure becomes unbearable. The final movement brought these fragments back together, but not in the way they had begun. The resolution was different. The ending was not triumphant, not in a traditional sense. It was quiet. It was something closer to acceptance. The night before the ceremony, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed and I thought about my 17-year-old self, sitting at that piano with shaking hands, and I thought about what I would tell her if I could go back in time. I would tell her that her body was not betraying her. Her body was protecting her. Her hands were saying, "This is not what you actually want." And that message, as painful as it was to receive, was the most honest communication she received from anyone in her life. I would tell her that it would take 13 years to understand that not all messages sent by authority figures are worth obeying. I would tell her that the people who love you can still hurt you, and sometimes they hurt you because they are terrified of their own pain. I would tell her that claiming her own life does not require permission from anyone, not even the people who built their identities around controlling her. And I would tell her that she is going to get a second chance. It won't look like what she expected. It will be messier and more complicated and more frightening, but it will be hers. Olivia's wedding was scheduled to begin at 4 o'clock in the afternoon on a Saturday in May. The Riverside Hotel's grand ballroom had been transformed into what I can only describe as a monument to the illusion of perfection. Every surface gleamed. Every flower was arranged with military precision. Every table setting was placed exactly 2.5 inches from the edge of the table, creating an illusion of harmony that felt fundamentally dishonest to me. I arrived early, as requested. My mother wanted time to inspect my appearance, my mental state, my commitment to maintaining the family's image. I wore a simple black dress, not the designer dress that my mother had suggested, not the dress that she had offered to buy me as a gesture of reconciliation, but a dress that I had owned for 3 years that was plain and serviceable and entirely my own. My mother looked at me and said, "That dress makes you look like you're attending a funeral, not a celebration." I said, "Maybe I'm mourning something." She didn't ask what. The ceremony took place in the hotel's chapel, a room designed to look elegant without committing to any particular spiritual tradition. Olivia looked beautiful, though I noticed the way her jaw was clenched throughout the entire service. I wondered if anyone else could see the anxiety encoded in her body, the stiffness in her shoulders, the way she held her bouquet like it was a shield protecting her from view. After the ceremony, after the photographs, after the cocktail hour where my mother circulated through the crowd and performed her version of a proud mother while my father stood to the side, nursing a drink that never got smaller, people began filtering into the reception space. The ballroom was organized like a stage. This was something I hadn't anticipated. There was an actual raised platform where the band would perform, and a smaller piano on a lower platform, positioned to the side of the room. The piano was a beautiful instrument, a Steinway grand, the kind of piano that musicians dream about playing. And it was positioned in such a way that it would be clearly visible to everyone at the reception, but somehow also peripheral. It was the kind of positioning that says, "You will be seen, but you will not be central." Marcus Allen, the bandleader, found me about 20 minutes before the reception was scheduled to officially begin. He was a man in his mid-30s with the kind of confidence that comes from knowing you're exceptionally good at your job. He had organized the entertainment for hundreds of weddings, and his band was known for their ability to navigate the emotional terrain of these events, keeping things light enough to preserve the fantasy of perfect celebration, but strategic enough to allow for moments of genuine emotion. "You're the piano player," Marcus said. It wasn't a question. I confirmed that I was. "Your mother called me 3 times this week to ensure that you would play softly, to ensure that you would not upstage the band, to ensure that you understood the importance of being complementary rather than central." "I'm not surprised," I said. "Are you okay with those parameters?" I looked at him directly. "I'm going to play what I came to play. You'll know when it's time because I'm going to have a coordinating signal with your team. When I signal, you're going to cut the background music and let me have the space. At the end of my piece, you'll come back in. Is that something you can do?" Marcus looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Then he smiled. "Your mother will absolutely lose her mind," he said. "I know," I said. "But that's not my responsibility to manage." Marcus introduced me to Maya Brooks, the event coordinator for the evening. Maya was a woman in her late 20s who had the kind of exhausted energy that comes from managing other people's emotions for a living. She was also, I discovered, someone who had very little patience for artificial hierarchies. "You want to take over the soundscape at some point," Maya said. And again, it wasn't a question. "Your mother wants you to be background. Your sister wants you to feel supported. And you want to actually be heard. So what I'm hearing is that I need to make sure the technical elements support the version of this event that serves you." "That's exactly what you're hearing," I said. "Okay," Maya said. "Here's what we're going to do. I'm going to install a hidden pedal beneath the piano, something that only you can reach. When you press it, it's going to send a signal to the band's audio system. The main microphones will cut, and I'll remotely activate the spotlight. Nobody will know it's coming. It will look like magic. It will look like fate." We spent the next hour discussing the technical details. We talked about the exact moment in my piece where I wanted the audio transition to happen. We talked about the lighting. We talked about the potential reactions and the possible consequences. Maya treated this not like a problem that needed to be managed, but like a theatrical production that needed to be executed with precision. "Why are you helping me?" I asked her at one point. "Because I watched my mother pretend to be something she wasn't for 40 years, and I watched it kill her," Maya said. "Not literally, but something in her did die, and she spent the last years of her life telling me, 'Make sure you don't do what I did. Make sure you don't make yourself small for other people.' You're not making yourself small. I'm going to make sure that everything around you supports that." The reception officially began at 6 o'clock. Guests were seated at round tables, each one decorated with centerpieces that cost more than my monthly rent. The band began playing jazz standards, nothing too challenging, nothing that might make the guests feel uncomfortable or required to actually listen. The music was designed to be present without being demanding. It was designed to be exactly what my mother had asked for: background. I sat at the piano but didn't play. I was waiting. I watched the reception unfold. I watched my mother move through the room like she was conducting an orchestra, greeting people, introducing people to other people, creating and managing the narrative of this event. I watched my father stand near the bar with his hands in his pockets, occasionally making conversation with people he recognized, but mostly looking like he wanted to be somewhere else. I watched Olivia dance with her new husband, and I could see the moment when she started to relax, when she began to believe that maybe, just maybe, she had actually pulled off this entire performance of her life. Around 8 o'clock, after the dinner had been served and the toasts had been given, my mother approached the stage. She took the microphone, even though nobody had asked her to take the microphone, and she began to speak about Olivia. She talked about what a successful daughter Olivia was, what a beautiful bride she made, what an excellent choice she had made in her husband. And then she paused and she said, "I also want to acknowledge my younger daughter, Emily, who has been helping to create the musical atmosphere for our celebration this evening. Emily, would you play something for us? Something gentle? Something that won't interfere with the flow of the evening?" Everyone turned to look at me. This was the moment. This was either the moment where I backed down, where I played the role that I had been assigned, where I made myself small in order to accommodate everyone else's comfort, or it was the moment where I claimed something that had been taken from me. I stood up, I walked to the piano, and I sat down on the bench. For a moment, I did nothing. My hands rested on my lap. I looked out at the 200 faces watching me. I could see my mother in the third row, already smiling, already proud because she thought she had won, because she thought I was about to do exactly what she wanted me to do. I placed my hands on the keys. I took a breath, and I began to play. The first few phrases were gentle, exactly as my mother had requested. The piece began with a simple motif, something that sounded almost like a lullaby, something almost maternal. and I could feel my mother relaxing. I could feel her settling back into her chair, satisfied that I had understood my role. But then the second movement began, and the music started to fracture. The notes became more complex. The rhythm became less predictable. The piece started to demand something from the listener, not in an aggressive way, but in a way that required actual attention. And I could see people in the audience shifting in their chairs, wondering what was happening. I could see my mother's expression beginning to change from pride to concern. Around 3 minutes in, I reached down and pressed the hidden pedal that Maya had installed. Everything happened at once. The band's background music cut out with an abruptness that made several people jump in their seats. The room fell into silence. Not a peaceful silence, but a silence that felt almost physical in its intensity. And then the spotlight hit me. Not the soft ambient lighting that had been illuminating the room all evening, but a single focused beam of bright white light that made me the center of attention, whether anyone had wanted that to happen or not. I could hear my mother gasp. I continued to play. The third movement was the most vulnerable part of the piece. The part where the broken fragments of the melody started to come back together. Not perfectly, but with the kind of beauty that only exists in imperfect resolution. My hands were steady now. The trembling had not returned. Years of practice, years of not playing, years of pushing through fear, all of it had prepared me for this moment. I finished the piece. The final note hung in the air, sustained and resonant, and exactly what I had meant it to be. For a moment there was nothing. Complete, absolute silence. I could see people looking at each other, trying to figure out what had just happened. And then someone, I think it was Linda Thompson, Olivia's new mother-in-law and the woman who had built her entire identity around her role as the arbiter of social propriety, set down her wine glass and began to applaud. Others joined in. Within seconds, the entire room was applauding. Some people stood. The band slowly began playing again, uncertain, trying to figure out how to reclaim the narrative of the evening that had just been completely upended. My mother, I noticed, was not applauding. The reception continued for another 3 hours, but something had fundamentally shifted. The tone of the evening had changed. Where before there had been a kind of perfunctory celebration, now there was genuine energy. People were actually talking to each other instead of just performing at each other. People were actually enjoying themselves instead of just executing the predetermined script of what a wedding reception should look like. Olivia found me about 20 minutes after I finished playing. She pulled me into the hallway outside the ballroom and she was crying. Not sad crying, but something more complicated. Relief mixed with fear, mixed with something that looked like recognition. That was the most beautiful and the most devastating thing I have ever witnessed, she said. I'm sorry, I told her. I didn't mean to. Don't apologize, Olivia interrupted. I'm just saying that I wish I had the kind of courage to do what you just did. I wish I had spent my entire life being that honest instead of building this entire architecture of lies. It's not too late, I said. It might be, Olivia said. And then she hugged me, and I could feel her shaking. My parents found me in the bathroom about an hour after that. My mother was angry, the kind of angry that is expressed through a certain stiffness in the shoulders, a certain tightness in the voice, a certain way of holding your face so that no emotion can escape. My father was embarrassed, which was a different kind of pain altogether. We need to talk about what you just did, my mother said. I played a piece of music, I said. That's what I was invited to do. You deliberately sabotaged your sister's wedding, my mother said. You made this entire evening about yourself instead of about Olivia. No, I said. I made this evening about music, about honesty, about something that was actually authentic instead of something that was just performed for the benefit of people who don't actually care about any of us. Linda Thompson cares, my mother said. Linda Thompson is the most respected person in our community, and what she saw tonight was a young woman who is unstable and unprofessional, and Linda Thompson invited me to come study with a masterclass she's organizing, my father said quietly. Everyone turned to look at him. Bob had been so quiet for so long that it was almost shocking to hear him speak. While you and Emily were having this conversation, Linda pulled me aside and told me that she wants to sponsor Emily for an advanced program. She said that what Emily played tonight was the most genuinely moving performance of live music she had experienced in 20 years. My mother's face went very still. I realized in that moment that the architecture I had been pushing against my entire life was not actually as solid as I had thought it was. It was constructed entirely out of fear: my mother's fear, my father's silence, my sister's compliance, the community's need for things to remain comfortable and predictable and safe. The next morning, I woke up to dozens of messages. People I hadn't spoken to in years were reaching out to tell me that they had heard about my performance. Some of them were congratulatory. Some of them were confused. Some of them were angry that I had created a scene at a family event. I realized that I had become a story, and once you become a story, you lose the ability to control the narrative. I took the week off work. I didn't leave my apartment. I sat with my piano and I tried to process what had happened, what it meant, what I was supposed to do with the fact that I had spent 13 years being very careful to be invisible, and then in 8 minutes I had made it impossible for anyone to pretend I didn't exist. Jenna called me on Thursday of that week. She wanted me to come to her house. When I arrived, she had prepared lunch, and we sat in her music room, surrounded by all the evidence of her life's work teaching music to thousands of students who came through her classroom with dreams and fears and questions about whether they had enough talent to justify their passion. I'm having a lot of complicated feelings, I told her. Tell me about them, Jenna said. I'm angry at my mother for making me feel like my music was only valuable if it served her narrative. I'm angry at my father for being so absent that my mother had all of the power. I'm angry at myself for letting 13 years pass before I decided to reclaim something that belonged to me. I'm angry at a system that makes young people feel like they have to be perfect in order to have value. And I'm also terrified that I've destroyed my relationship with my family, and I don't know how to fix that. The anger is the easy part, Jenna said. The hard part is the terror. The hard part is learning to sit with the possibility that sometimes fixing things means they have to break first. Your family is not actually broken, Emily. Your family is just being forced to confront the fact that they can't control you anymore, and that's going to hurt them. But it's not your job to manage their pain. When do I know when I've done enough? When do I know when I've made my point? You don't, Jenna said. You just keep living. You just keep making choices that feel true to you. And eventually, the people around you either learn to accept the person you actually are, or they don't. Either way, you're going to be okay. 2 weeks after the wedding, my mother showed up at my apartment without calling first. This was unusual. In our family, we operated on a specific protocol of phone calls and scheduled visits, and maintaining a buffer of politeness between our interactions. Showing up unannounced was not something my mother did. It was too chaotic. It was too raw. She looked different. She looked older, somehow, and smaller. She was carrying something. A cardboard box, the kind of box that might contain things that needed to be stored or discarded or processed in some significant way. "Can I come in?" she asked. I let her in. We sat in my living room, the room that contained my piano, my sanctuary, the place where I had started to rebuild a relationship with myself. "I need to tell you something," my mother said. "I need to tell you something that I should have told you a long time ago, and I'm only telling you now because I'm running out of time." "What do you mean, running out of time?" I asked. I had a doctor's appointment 3 weeks ago, she said. They found something. It's cancer. Pancreatic cancer. They say I have about 8 months if I'm lucky. A year if I'm really lucky, and if the treatment works better than they expect it to. The information arrived in my brain but didn't quite land. It was too big. It was too much to contain in the small space of that moment. Oh, Mom, let me finish, she said. I don't want your sympathy. I want your understanding. I want you to understand why I did what I did. She opened the cardboard box. Inside were programs from piano competitions, newspaper clippings, photographs, and underneath all of that, a stack of letters with my grandmother's handwriting on the envelopes. Your grandmother kept me from pursuing my dreams because she was terrified, my mother said. She was terrified of who I would become if I was allowed to be successful, to be visible, to be central to my own story. So she married me off, and she told me that my real purpose was to support a man and raise a family. And I spent 20 years being angry about that. I spent 20 years telling myself that I was going to do everything differently with my own daughter. I was going to make sure that you had every opportunity that I was denied. But you did exactly what she did, I said. You made my music about you. I know, my mother said. I know that now. I understood it when I was sitting in that ballroom watching you play, and I realized that I couldn't control what you were doing, and I understood that I didn't want to control it anymore. I understood that I had spent 30 years trying to rewrite the story of my own failure through your success, and in doing that, I was creating the exact same architecture of pain that my mother had created for me. She pulled out one of my grandmother's letters. She asked if I wanted her to read it to me. I said that I did. The letter was dated 17 years ago, addressed to my mother, written in a handwriting that was careful and measured and somehow sad. In the letter, my grandmother, who I had seen maybe 5 times in my entire life before she died, was apologizing. She was saying that she had made a mistake. She was saying that she had let her own fear determine the course of her daughter's life, and she was living with the knowledge of that mistake every single day. She was asking my mother to forgive her, and she was asking my mother to make different choices with her own children. I got this letter when I was 42 years old, my mother said, 2 weeks before she died, and I read it, and I was so angry at her, because she was asking me to do something different, but she had spent my entire childhood making sure that I didn't know how to do something different. So I put this letter away. I didn't think about it. I just kept doing what I had always done, which was project my own unfulfilled dreams onto you. Why are you telling me this now? I asked. Because I'm going to die, my mother said. And I don't want to die with the knowledge that I hurt you the way my mother hurt me. I want you to understand that it wasn't malice. It was fear. And I want to give you permission to be angry at me, and I want to give myself permission to ask for your forgiveness. And I want to make sure that at least before I leave this world, I haven't lost you completely. We sat in silence for a long time. I thought about all the years I had spent trying to get my mother to see me as I actually was, and I realized that what she was trying to do now was exactly that. She was trying to see me. Maybe it was too late. Maybe it would have been better if she could have done this when I was 17, instead of when she was 55 and dying. But maybe the timing didn't matter as much as the intention. I have something for you, my mother said. She pulled out a small envelope from the bottom of the box. It's not an apology. I don't think apologies are enough for what I did. But it's something. The envelope contained a letter, handwritten in my mother's handwriting, dated the day after my wedding performance. I opened it and started to read. The letter said, Emily, I have been sitting with what you did at your sister's wedding for 24 hours, And I think I need to tell you some things before I explode or disappear or do whatever it is that people do when they realize they have spent their entire life running in exactly the wrong direction. I have been so angry at you. I have been angry because you didn't do what I asked you to do. And I have been angry because I understand exactly why you didn't do what I asked you to do. I have been angry because you had the courage to claim something that I spent 60 years being too frightened to claim. I have been angry because watching you play that piece, I realized that you are the person I always wanted to be, and instead of being proud of you, I was jealous of you. I was jealous of my own daughter. And that is a special kind of shame that I'm going to be carrying around for the rest of my life. But I want you to know that I see you now. I see who you actually are, not who I wanted you to be. And I am so sorry for all the years I spent trying to be someone other than a mother to you. I spent all those years trying to be a conductor. And what I should have been trying to do was simply listen to you. I love you. I'm sorry. I'm so incredibly sorry. I started crying. Not because I had decided to forgive her, but because I could feel her desperation to be seen and known by me, and I could recognize it because I had been carrying that same desperation my entire life. We had both been performing for each other. We had both been pretending to be someone we weren't in order to keep the other person comfortable, and we had both been suffering because of it. I need time, I told her. I know, she said. That's okay. You deserve time. My mother underwent chemotherapy. She was sick for most of the summer, and I found myself spending time with her, not because I had decided to forgive her, but because I realized that forgiveness is not a destination you reach and then stay at forever. Forgiveness is a process. It's a choice you make over and over again, sometimes multiple times in a single day. It's choosing to be present with someone even when you're still angry at them. It's choosing to see their humanity even when you're hurt by what they've done. She lost her hair. She became very thin. She spent days when she couldn't get out of bed. And during those times, I would sit in her room, and sometimes I would play music for her. Not the big, confrontational pieces, but small, gentle things that I had learned over the years. Sometimes she would fall asleep while I was playing. Sometimes she would cry. Sometimes she would ask me to stop because the emotions were too big to contain. My father, it turned out, had been more present than I had realized. He had simply been present in a way that I didn't understand as a child. Quiet, steady, always there without needing to be acknowledged for it. He made my mother soup. He accompanied her to doctor's appointments. He held her hand when she was in pain. And I realized that his silence had not been indifference. It had been a kind of commitment to being solid enough to hold my mother up without requiring anything in return. By fall, my mother was in remission. The doctors said that her prognosis was better than expected. She still had about 5 years, probably, and she might have more. She was going to live through at least another season, maybe another decade. The reprieve was not permanent, but it was real. Around this time, I was offered a position at a community arts center. It wasn't a glamorous position. I would be teaching group piano classes to teenagers and adults who had no professional aspirations. I would be making a modest salary that was significantly less than what I made at the cafe, but it would allow me to do something I actually wanted to do with my life. It would allow me to help other people reclaim their relationship with music, the way I had reclaimed my own. I took the job. The first class I taught was on a Tuesday evening in October. 7 people showed up, ranging in age from 15 to 73. Some of them had played an instrument as children and had stopped for various reasons. Some of them had always wanted to play but had never had the opportunity. Some of them were there because they were going through something, a divorce, a job loss, a health scare, and they wanted to do something that felt like creating instead of destroying. I didn't teach them a specific piece. I taught them about listening. I taught them about the relationship between tension and release in music. I taught them that when you play in a group, you're not just making sound, you're creating a structure that supports and is supported by the people around you. You're making yourself background sometimes, and foreground sometimes, and learning how to move between those positions without losing yourself in either one. What does it mean to be good at this? One of the students asked me. What does it mean to be a good piano player? It means different things to different people, I said. For some people, being good means being able to play the most technically difficult pieces. For other people, being good means being able to make people feel something. For some people, being good means being able to hold a steady rhythm while someone else takes the melody. For other people, being good means having the courage to take the melody even when your hands are shaking. I think being good means knowing who you are when you're playing and making choices that come from that place of knowing instead of from fear of what other people will think. I started composing again. Not just the occasional piece, but regularly. I would sit at my piano after work and I would let my hands find the keys and I would write down whatever came out. Some of it was good. Some of it was absolute garbage. Most of it was somewhere in the middle. Earnest attempts at self-expression that weren't perfect, but were honest. My mother came to one of my community center recitals in November. She sat in the front row, and she watched me teach the group pieces. And she watched my students play together, each one of them finding their place in the ensemble, each one of them contributing something essential. After the recital, she said to me, "I want you to teach me." "To play piano?" I asked. "Yes," she said. "I want to learn to play the way I never got to learn. I don't want to be good at it. I don't want to compete. I just want to experience what it feels like to make music for the sake of making music." So we started lessons. My mother at 55, taking piano lessons from her daughter, starting from the absolute beginning because her mother had never taught her to play. It was complicated. Sometimes she would get frustrated with herself. Sometimes I would get frustrated with her. But mostly it was the opposite of what our relationship had been before. Mostly it was me teaching her to be patient with herself, to celebrate small progress, to understand that learning something is not about being perfect. It's about showing up. In December, I received an email from a man named Dr. James Harrison. Dr. Harrison was a faculty member at the State Conservatory, the same conservatory that had rejected me at 17. He had heard through a colleague that I had performed at a wedding earlier in the year, and he had obtained a recording of the performance. He was writing to ask if I would be interested in coming to meet with him about the possibility of developing a formal teaching position at the conservatory. He was interested in my approach to music education. He was interested in my compositions. He wanted to see what I might be able to contribute to a program that he was developing specifically designed to support adult musicians who had stepped away from music and wanted to return to it without the pressure of traditional performance metrics. "You should do it," Olivia said when I told her about the email. Olivia and I had become much closer since the wedding. We had started having long phone conversations where we told each other things that we had never articulated before. Fears, dreams, resentments, hopes. We had started being actual sisters instead of being performers pretending to be sisters. "I'm not sure I'm ready," I said. "That's the thing, though," Olivia said. "You're never going to feel ready. You're just going to feel like you might be ready. And then you have to take the risk and find out if you actually were or not. But at least you'll know. You'll know that you tried." I met with Dr. Harrison in January. His office was on the top floor of the conservatory's main building, and from his window I could see the practice studios where students were working on their repertoires. I could see the concert hall where performances happened. I could see the entire infrastructure of a life devoted to music, and I realized that I had been inside this building once before, 13 years ago, and I had failed a test and decided that I would never be part of this world. But I was wrong. I had always been part of this world. I had just stepped away from it. And now I was choosing to step back in, on my own terms, in my own way. By spring, I had a formal teaching position at the conservatory, and I had also finished a full composition, a piano concerto that was about 30 minutes long and told the story of a person learning to reclaim their voice. I called it Return Full Movement. That same spring, my sister had a baby, a daughter. Olivia and her husband asked if I would play music at the baby shower. This time, there was no complicated negotiation. There was no hidden agenda. Olivia simply asked if I would do something that made me happy, and I said yes. And I played music that I had written, and that came from a place of genuine joy instead of from anger or fear or a desire to prove something. And in the audience, my mother sat with tears in her eyes, and I realized that she was crying not because she was proud of me, though I think she was, but because she was experiencing the satisfaction of witnessing someone she loved claiming their own life. She was experiencing the freedom of finally letting go of the need to control the narrative. My mother and I still have a complicated relationship. She still sometimes says things that hurt me. She still sometimes reverts to old patterns of trying to manage how other people perceive her through me. But now we talk about it. Now she can hear it when I tell her that I need her to stop. And now I can understand that she is a person who grew up with very specific constraints, and that she did the best she could with the tools that she had available to her at the time. Last month, we had a conversation that crystallized something for me. We were having tea in her kitchen, my childhood kitchen, the kitchen where I had spent countless hours practicing piano while my mother prepared dinner, and she asked me if I forgave her. It was a direct question, the kind of question that requires a direct answer, and I realized that I had been avoiding giving her one. I don't think forgiveness works the way you think it works, I told her. I think you're imagining that there's a moment where I say, I forgive you, and then everything becomes easy and we can move forward without complications. But that's not what's happening. What's happening is that I'm learning to see you as a person instead of as a villain, and I'm learning to sit with the pain that you caused me without needing it to mean that you're a bad person. And I'm learning to accept that we both made mistakes and that we both were doing the best we could with the limitations of what we understood at the time. So I'm not forgiving you. I'm understanding you. And I'm choosing to continue being in relationship with you despite the fact that you hurt me. And that's a lot harder than forgiveness, actually. Forgiveness seems easier. She cried. She put down her teacup and she cried, and I sat with her while she cried, and I didn't try to make it better or fix it or tell her that it was okay. I just sat with her. And that felt like something closer to truth than anything we had done before. On a night in early June, I was walking through the community center where I teach. The sun was setting, and the light was coming through the windows at that particular angle that makes everything look like it's simultaneously ending and beginning. I passed the practice studio, and I could hear students playing. I could hear a teenager practicing scales, trembling slightly, either from nerves or from the effort of learning something new. I could hear an older adult playing a Bach prelude with deliberation and care. I could hear the sound of people engaging in the act of creation, of building something that didn't exist before. One of my students, a woman named Patricia, who was taking lessons to process her divorce, had asked me after class that day, "Do you think I'll ever be good?" "Good at what?" I asked her. "Good at playing. Good at music. Good at creating something that matters." I told her what I've learned. Music doesn't exist to be good or bad. Music exists to be an expression of something that's inside you that needs to come out. Some days that expression will sound beautiful to other people. Some days it will sound like struggle. Some days it will sound like grief or anger or confusion. All of those things matter. All of those expressions have value. The question isn't whether you'll be good. The question is whether you're willing to be honest. The rest will follow from there." She nodded, but I could see that she didn't quite believe me. I remember being in that place, where the validation I needed was external, where I needed someone to tell me that I was valuable enough to deserve taking up space. It took me 30 years to understand that the validation I needed was internal. It had to come from me. No amount of applause could have given me what I needed to give myself. I thought about my 17-year-old self with her shaking hands. I thought about the 13 years I spent trying to disappear. I thought about the moment at my sister's wedding when I pressed the hidden pedal and claimed the space that had always been mine. And I realized that I had been looking at those moments as if they were separate events in a linear timeline, but they weren't. They were all the same moment repeated over and over again, the moment where I chose to show up even when I was terrified. I understood that none of these moments was the real moment of transformation. The real moment had been happening all along, in every small choice to show up, in every day that I decided not to let fear make decisions for me, in every conversation with my mother where I told her the truth, even though it made her uncomfortable. The transformation wasn't dramatic. It wasn't like flipping a switch. It was like watching something slowly change color in the sunlight, so gradual that you don't notice it happening until one day you look up and realize that the entire landscape has shifted. I realized that I had spent so much of my life trying to figure out what color I was supposed to be, what instrument I was supposed to play in the orchestra of my family's narrative. And somewhere along the way, I had understood something that had taken me 30 years to really integrate. I am not background. Nobody is background. We are all central to our own stories. We all get to decide what we sound like. We all get to take up space. But more than that, I had learned something even deeper. Being background doesn't make you less important. Being support doesn't make you less essential. The question is whether you're choosing that role because it serves you, or whether you're being forced into it by fear and obligation and the weight of other people's expectations. There is nobility in being the foundation. There is power in creating the conditions for other people to shine. But that has to be your choice. That has to come from a place of agency rather than coercion. The question was never whether I was good enough to be heard. The question was whether I was brave enough to claim that I deserved to be heard. And the answer, I finally understood, was yes. I walked out into the June evening, and I walked home to my apartment where my piano was waiting. On the way, I stopped at a coffee shop, not the one where I used to work, but a different one that I chose because I liked the barista and the way she remembered my order without me having to ask. I ordered my tea, and I sat for a moment and I looked at the other people in the cafe. I saw a woman working on a laptop, probably writing something. I saw a man reading a book. I saw teenagers doing homework. I saw elderly people playing chess. I saw all these people engaged in the act of being themselves. And I understood that nobody is really watching. Nobody is really judging. We're all just trying to figure out how to exist in a way that feels true. When I got home, I sat down at the keyboard and I played the opening of my composition, the one that had started as an 8-minute piece at my sister's wedding and had become a full concerto and had become a way for me to process everything that I had survived and everything that I had learned. But tonight, I didn't stop at the opening. I played through the entire piece, all 30 minutes of it. The piece is in 3 movements. The first movement is about loss. It's about the moment when you realize that something you thought you would have forever is being taken away from you. It's about the specific grief of losing not just an opportunity, but an entire identity, an entire future that you thought was guaranteed. The second movement is about the void that comes after the loss. It's about the years spent trying to be invisible, trying to be safe, trying to make sure that nothing else gets taken from you by simply refusing to want anything. The third movement is about return, not a triumphant return, but a tender one. It's about slowly coming back to life. It's about discovering that you are still alive, even though you tried so hard to disappear. My hands did not shake. My voice was steady. My breathing was even. I played with the knowledge of someone who had earned the right to be heard, not through perfect technique or flawless execution, but through the simple act of showing up over and over again, choosing honesty even when it was hard, choosing to be seen even when it was terrifying. And in the silence between the notes, in the space where sound becomes memory and memory becomes meaning, I felt myself finally coming home. I felt my 17-year-old self and my 30-year-old self occupying the same moment, the same body, the same hands on the keyboard. I felt the weight of all the years I had spent running, and I felt the lightness of finally stopping. I thought about my mother listening to the recording of my wedding performance. I thought about my father quietly supporting me without needing anything in return. I thought about Olivia giving me permission to be myself in a way that nobody else in my family had been able to do. I thought about Jenna and Maya and Marcus and Linda, all the people who had seen me and believed in me and made it possible for me to believe in myself. And I thought about the girl I will teach next week, the one who will sit down at the piano for the first time and will have trembling hands and will ask me if she's good enough, and I will tell her what I wish someone had told me when I was 7 years old and falling in love with music. You are not good enough, and you are also perfect exactly as you are. You don't need permission to take up space. You don't need to make yourself smaller to keep other people comfortable. You are allowed to be central to your own story. You are allowed to make mistakes. You are allowed to change your mind about what you want. You are allowed to be messy and complicated and not fully formed. You are allowed to be yourself. And that, all by itself, is enough.